Cuphead is an incredibly popular and massively difficult platformer game from 2017 featuring two brothers Cuphead and Mugman, like Mario and Luigi but cups, in a classic 1920s Disney animation style that is fantastic. This game looks beautiful and sounds awesome. It's just stupid difficult and frustrating, so I never finished it. It came to much surprise when I saw the Cuphead Show, and I of course immediately was worried about the quality of this product. I'm glad to say, however, that they did a good job, but there are two differences between the game and the show. The first being, the characters have voices. The game was a silent game with music. Characters talked with text boards like in Mute movies back in the day. Much like Mario getting a voice hearing these Cuphead characters speak. Both have this semi-heavy 1920s voice, so that works out, but it's still a little bit jarring. I understand why they did it, but still. Second is the music, which, in all fairness, is there a bit but much less. The typical 20s piano music from the game is pretty much gone and replaced with something less spunky. It still works, but it ain't the same. Those aside, it's fun to see the two brothers get into antics and deal with the devil and his soul-stealing minions over the course of 12 lovely 15-minute episodes. There's slapstick humor and all that good stuff. The comedy often hits well. Plots are simple but enjoyable because they don't take long to unwrap. Even the ones that take a couple of episodes. This isn't really a cartoon for kids, but I personally didn't see anything a kid wouldn't be able to handle. It's not as good as the game, but it's worth a watch. And you won't throw anything across the room for dying 150 times on the same level. Check that. RRR, meaning Radram Ranam Rudram or Rage, War, Blood or even Rise Raw Revolt, is a 2022 Indian movie about two people on the opposites of the fence who, unknowingly, become friends even though they are meant to be enemies. We follow two real-life Indian revolutionaries and fantasize about what would have happened if these two people met in the 1920s to fight against the British occupier. Komaram Beam ventures to Delhi to track down a young girl who was kidnapped from the Gon tribe. Someone mentions this to the perpetrator, a British governor, who orders the police to put a stop to him. Police officer Ray Ramaraja volunteers as he wishes to get promoted and tries to track down the tribesman. Both characters meet without knowing what is going on, save a kid in the most spectacular way, and become friends. Eventually the truth comes out and then even more shit happens. There's a lot of shit that happens in this movie. Fighting a tiger happens. Riding in on an elephant happens. A dance battle at a British club. It happens. Love happens. Brotherhood happens. RRR is great. In fact, it's super great. It's a roller coaster ride much like KGF and Kizari, and it ramps up when the two discover they are actually enemies. And after that even more twists and actions occur. I can't recommend this enough. I liked RRR a bit more than KGF due to the fact there's a little bit more substance to this movie, but there's style. A lot of style. And I'm not talking about the stash of our main character. So stylish. The fact all white British people are depicted as evil was a little on the nose on my part, but I can forgive it due to the over-the-top nature of this film in general. RRR is a must-see, even for people like me, who didn't want to watch Bollywood movies. Smash that. The Cheerleaders is the first movie in the 1970s cheerleader franchise about happy, jumpy and especially sexually active cheerleaders in some American high school. In this film we have our cheering girls try to hump, or not hump, boys and men all over the place for various reasons until they, eventually, decide to help the school spirit of their football team by sleeping with the opponents the night before a major game. One girl, Jeannie, played by a person stage named Stephanie Fondue in her only role, however is a virgin and part of a bet between two other cheerleaders about her being able to remove that label or not. Needless to say, there will be plenty of tits and ass in this picture as the girls go through several funny to not so funny antics with the people around them. The Cheerleaders isn't the best movie in the Cheerleaders franchise. Granted, I only one other, but I enjoyed that one a lot more. The goofball antics done in this film are very reminiscent of all the other goofball films, which isn't a bad thing, but this movie movie doesn't have that extra spunk to elevate it to something special. Check that. The necessary death of Charlie Countryman, also known as Charlie Countryman, is a sheer LaBeouf vehicle where a guy decides to go to Bucharest, no, not Budapest, after his dead mother tells him to. On the airplane he meets a friendly man who talks about his daughter who promptly dies, leaving him with the gift he intended to give to his daughter. She then of course meets said daughter and falls madly in love. And can you blame him? It's 7 Rachel Wood, darn it. Anyways, there's more to the matter, and you know shit will hit the fan when you know that that girl is linked to some very dangerous people. This movie has a lot of familiar faces. Besides LaBeouf and Miss Wood, we also are greeted by Mads Mikkelsen, Vincent D'Onofrio and Harry Potter's Ginger Rupert Grint. Charlie Countryman is very much a artsy-fartsy romantic road movie with a little bit of crime and mystery and some esoteric stuff. Cause you know, people generally don't talk to the ghosts of the dead people. There's plenty of good stuff that happens in this film and I generally enjoyed it very much. Wood is fine as she acts with a Bulgarian accent, and Mads, as always, is charming no matter what he does. LaBeouf is pretty much himself, if that person even exists, so you can take or leave it. Suffice to say, this is not for people who dislike Shia LaBeouf, but there's plenty of stars to have you ignore that. In my opinion, I did enjoy it. So, just do it. Check that. The Northman is the much-anticipated Viking movie by Robert Eggers, featuring a buffed-out Alexander Skarsgård as the son of a Viking king who gets killed by his brother. The son flees and is announced as dead by the betrayer's men. Flash forward a decade or so and we see the son, Skarsgård, semi-berserker rage a town during a raid. He of course seeks vengeance for the death of his father and goes through several hoops to get it. After the success of Vikings, I was pleased to see a badass Viking movie, and according to the trailer it appeared it would be brutal. Unfortunately, I found most of this movie lacking in brutality. Sure, bad stuff happens all around, especially during the raid. And there's some very Hannibal the Series-esque depictions of corpses, but those are far between and cut out almost immediately. It's just not as brutal as I expected. Skarsgård has presence as the towering mountain of muscle and rage, but as soon as he sheds his hair he seems to lose a lot of his power. Much like mythical Samson in his day. He still gets his shit done, however, but these quiet moments aren't all that. The conclusion of the film with his mother, played by plastic surgeon to oblivion Nicole Kidman, was fairly annoying. And the final battle between his father's killer made me roll my eyes. The Northman is lauded to be a great film, for me. It's good. It's slightly more stylish and brutal than Vikings, but if the Boneless had a better I am this and that rant than Skarsgård did in this flick. Overall, this movie is merely good. For a great Viking movie with the same vibe and more brutality, please watch Valhalla Rising with Mads Mikkelsen instead. Check that. With a name like the incredible two-headed Transplant, you just have to check this movie out. In this film we follow a slightly crazy scientist who is attempting to put 2 heads on several animals. Why exactly it would be beneficial to have that is beyond me, but he had some success doing just that with mice, rats, snakes and simians, so hey, that's great, right? He lives on a lovely piece of land with his lovely wife, his eagle-like assistant, his gardener and the gardener's mentally challenged giant of a son who just happens to have a small crush on the wife. And I can't blame him. When a dangerous and violent rapist escapes, things get out of control. You don't have to be a rocket genius to wonder what will happen next. Remember the title and wonder what a two-headed person would go through, and you pretty much have the movie. At the end there's plenty to ponder about, but in the end all that stuff isn't important, since this is a B-movie that probably has some kind of cult status somewhere. The movie is what you expect it to be. It could have been better, but it could have been a lot worse. I just wonder how annoying it was to film this, cause of course this is created without CGI or any of that. Two-headed man walking around, and it works without being all too ridiculous. Check this out. Check that. Death Valley is a 1982 horror film with the kid from that super annoying Christmas Story movie. Luckily he isn't annoying in this film, where he plays a kind but smart child of a divorced couple. When he is forced to spend his vacation with his mother, he is pushed into a trip to the mother's boyfriend. Needless to say that spending time with his mother's fuck buddy isn't all that for the boy, so he does what any normal kid do: pay attention to other stuff and venture out. When a bunch of people get slashed up, the kid pretty much opens up the solution for the local sheriff. Needless to say that things will be a little bit more complicated, and that the killer eventually decides to hunt down the kid and his family to keep his secret. Death Valley was a surprisingly well-made movie and deserves a higher rating than a mere 5.5 on most sites. Personally, I think a 7 would suffice, since this isn't your generic slasher. It's much more about the relationship of the boy with his mother and her new boyfriend and how he tries to deal with it. Don't expect sappy shit. He ain't having any of it, and he isn't having any of it with the serial killer either, as he is quite the Kevin McAllister creating booby traps for his pursuer. The only thing that bothered me about this film is the ending, as it's way too abrupt, and I would have loved to see a little bit more. Don't ask me what they would show though, since the story was over, but still, this is a well-made wholesome slasher thriller that's definitely worth a watch. Check that. Boardinghouse is, I think, an indie movie from the early 80s about a group of models that go live in a boarding house run by a guy who wants to shag them all. There's a weird super ugly gardener who does creepy things, and the house seems to be haunted. Boardinghouse is a weird movie. It's not very well made, but you can see that the creator, John Wintergate, who also acts in it, put his heart into it. The script jumps from place to place and nothing really makes sense. Why are these girls living with this creep who wants to shag them? Why isn't there a lot of shagging? Why does the film look so dirty, making even the few nude scenes unattractive? Why is the gardener so creepy? Is he killing the girls? Are these girls even getting killed? Or is it a hallucination like they seem to have? Is this all linked to the telekinesis the creepy landlord is performing? Or is this house haunted by the black blob that sometimes appears? You'll find the answers to these questions, but watching the movie you'll end up confused to the way scenes are cut together and end. This movie needs an editor, a better camera, better actresses, a slightly better script, but the soundtrack, goddamn, the soundtrack is glorious. It's only one song, but it's amazing. Boardinghouse is a sight to see. It's a movie you should see because it's a good example on how not to make a movie. I've seen movies that are worse than this though, so it's right below good. Maybe even mediocre. So bad it's good is also giving it too much credit. Just consider this flick as a novelty. Drop that. What do you get when you combine RoboCop with Terminator but don't have the skill to make a cool and compelling movie? You get something that looks like TC-2000, set in the far-flung future of 2020. An ecological disaster sent the rich and powerful into underground cities, leaving the plebs to die on the surface. Jason Storm is part of an elite security force called Tracker Communicator, not to be mistaken with the hunter-killers from Terminator. Their sole task is to be sure none of these dirty above-grounders enters the subterranean complex. When Storm's partner ISS killed, she unwillingly is turned into a cyborg. The plot thickens when it's revealed that those rich and powerful elite aren't the nice guys. What a surprise, right? Stuff happens, but what I remember most about this movie, besides the 90s cheese, is the constant lame martial arts that pops up every 3 scenes. There's more kicking and punching in this movie than dialogue at times, and it's the same amount of quality in fighting as most of these 90s martial arts movies. It's not exciting, especially because you can hear most of these grunts and moans off these fighting dudes than anything else. Sure, you have to grunt and moan to punch hard, I guess. But still, looking at the cover alone you can immediately tell what this movie is going to be like. It's not good. It's 90s cheese to the MX and quite boring despite all the kicking and punching. Too bad. There's a gem in combining Terminator and RoboCop after all. Drop that. The Mad Adventures of Rabbi Jacob is a French-Italian comedy film with the legendary Louis de Funès, who plays a mean, bigoted businessman whose Jewish driver asks to be relieved for a couple of days so he can pick up his American uncle and Rabbi Jacob for a family visit in France. Fune's character, Victor Pivert's daughter, is getting married and he desperately needs to get to the church on time. When an Arab revolutionary leader is kidnapped, things start to get complicated and mixed up. What follows is an often hilarious mistaken identity film with plenty of jokes at the expense of pretty much everyone. Let me state this clearly. Pivot is a bigot against everyone. Jews, blacks, Chinese, Arabs, Italians, Belgians, and even his fellow French people. There's plenty of jokes in here that could be considered racist, but due to the nature of Pivert and the movie itself, it is quite the opposite. I saw this film partially as a kid and didn't notice any of it, but the pretty awesome and hilarious blackface scene made me go, oh wow. It's great though. Every race and religion gets it, and Pivert gets enough mockery by other characters and events during the movie to make it all fairly balanced. To me, that's the beauty of the movie and the way the world should work. Make fun of every single person, sexuality, religion, the works, and at the end you just go on with your own life. It's a sense of camaraderie that has no true victims, cause we all are victims in our own sense. Reality is more nuanced, of course, but despite the slapstick comedy in this film, eventually no one gets physically or emotionally hurt. This is a movie from a bygone era where, according to some these days, everything was racist. Sure, you can look at it like that, but due to the fact this movie exists and did this, it made a difference of color, ethnicity, or anything else into a normal thing rather than something foreign. We're all equal if we're all considered to be the human heaps of flesh that we can be. Watch Rabbi Jacob. It's funny and goes against everything cancel culture rails against. I'm sure they don't know about it though. Check that.